Money, money, money. I can't go a week working with couples without money being brought up into the equation of why they're arguing or a challenge they're having or even where resentment is showing up. So I brought Douglas and Heather Boneparth to come and talk with us about what we can do to improve our conversations around money. Let me share with you a little bit about them. Douglas is the founder of Bonafide Wealth, a wealth management firm catering to millennials and next-gen professionals in New York City. He sits on the CNBC and Investopedia Financial Advisory Councils and has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Barron's, and more. He is also a CFP board ambassador for New York and perpetually online person. He shares a mix of money, news, and humor with his 300,000 followers on X. Heather is now the director of business and legal affairs for Bonafide Wealth, but she's used to wearing many hats. She led the charge on the couple's first book about helping millennials achieve financial freedom while she was on maternity leave with their oldest daughter. Following her tenure as a corporate attorney in the commercial insurance industry, she's become a voice at the intersection of money, couples, and parenting. She spearheads their weekly newsletter, The Joint Account, which has more than 14,000 subscribers. Now they are the co-authors of the new book, Money Together: How to Find Fairness in Your Relationship and Become an Unstoppable Financial Team, which has been featured on NBC as well as the New York Times Your Money newsletter, CNBC, CNN, Yahoo Finance, and more. I loved talking to Heather and Douglas, and I know you're going to enjoy listening to their banter and also the tools and resources they provide us on how to have better conversations around the topic of money, no matter where you're from or what your background is. So go grab a warm drink and let's dive in. Welcome to Relationship Reset, a podcast for high-achieving couples who've been together for over a decade and don't want to feel like roommates anymore. I'm Katie Russler, relationship strategist and couples counselor with almost 20 years of experience helping ambitious couples reconnect, strengthen communication, and turn their relationship into the best part of their success story. This podcast is about using practical tools and a lot of real talk to help you understand your patterns, stop feeling stuck and discouraged, and start working on your relationship in ways that actually fit your busy life. Because your relationship shouldn't be the cost of your success, it should be the best part of it. So let's dive in. Welcome back to the podcast. When you talk to couples who've been together long term, usually the question comes up, what do you guys tend to argue about a lot? And money is one of the top 3 things people talk about. So I have brought Heather and Douglas Boneparth. They are the authors of the book Money Together. They're going to be talking to us about some practical tools on how to maybe even repair after some money fights, but also how to be more preventative in the future. So Douglas and Heather, thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thanks so much for having us, Kate.
Yeah, thanks.
Let's do a little bit of, tell us a little bit about the two of you. It is a relationship show. So you can go a little into like how we met, who we are, that kind of thing. And of course, you wrote a book together.
Absolutely.
I've never met this person in my life.
He's a hired actor. No, I'm kidding. Douglas and I met many, many years ago. We actually met as freshmen in college, and which I think gives us a very unique viewpoint about each other's lives, because in many respects, we really grew up together. And when we made the decision to start our adult lives together and to get married and move in together and all these things, we had already seen so much about what money meant to both of us and the role that money played in our lives. Today, I guess from a professional standpoint, we'll start that Heather, I'm a recovering corporate attorney. I spent more than a decade in the commercial insurance industry in various in-house roles until I joined our wealth management firm, Bonafide Wealth, 3 years ago. And I run our business and legal affairs and prepare and write a lot of our content. But if you want to share a little about you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Doug. I'm the president and founder of our wealth management firm called Bonafide Wealth. We're based out of New York City, and I focus on high-achieving millennials, their families, small business owners, and next-generation investors. I had this idea to invest in our generation long before they ever could invest a dollar in the markets or a dollar with our firm, and that's been kind of our long-term play here in the world of wealth management. And that has led Heather and I to talk about a lot of things that are very central, not only to our generation, but very central to just personal finance overall.
And it's been interesting because we've really had a front row seat to the unique challenges facing not just our generation, but specifically millennials, elder millennials. And so many of our challenges have been due to these unprecedented financial events, personal events, world events like the pandemic. And we've been experiencing them alongside our clients. So, we've found ourselves, and Douglas found himself often sitting across the table from folks facing these unique challenges and looking for a way through. But at the same time, we were going through them ourselves. And so when we sat down a couple of years ago, and, it wasn't just, what's the next angle? What are we going to write a book about that would be interesting to people? That's not how this started. This started because we had reached a crossroads in our own personal relationships where I had said to Doug, I'm not happy with where things currently stand. And what are we going to do to fix it? And that began the work that started us on the path of saying, let's sit down and start speaking with real couples, not just the way you do in your office and in your business, but let's start talking to them about how they actually feel around their money and how they feel about the power dynamics playing out in their relationship when it comes to money. Let's see what we can learn. And in the process, we learned a lot about ourselves. And that's what led us to writing this book.
I can imagine. So, what you guys are speaking to is one of the core pillars for me in my work and even on the podcast, which is legacy work.
Yes.
Relationship work to me is legacy work. People are watching you. Younger generations are watching you. Same with how we work with money together, how we see money, how we experience it. It's all legacy work. Let's dive into the roles that can play out in couples, especially around money. And I always think of the saver and the spender because ultimately when you talk to people, it's like, they always spend all the time. Well, they're always like a penny pinching all the time. And you're like, okay, so this is a normal opposites attract kind of situation. But share with me what you guys have uncovered, especially in the millennial generation around the saver versus the spender roles.
I'll throw this one thing in before I know who you're going to talk about. But before you do, I'll say this. I feel like that is such a frontline money conflict that, to your point, that couples run into. But it really is just the surface, right, of what's actually going on behind the behavior. The behavior we see in our bank accounts is the spending and the saving. But why?
Yeah.
Why are people the way they are around money? Right?
Heather brings up a good point. Like, most people go to the surface level, which is what we're talking about right now, right? Most people are going to, and what does that mean? Hey, let's examine our budget. Let's examine our cash flow. Let's have conversations around our spending and where we need to do better. Yeah, that's important to do. But to Heather's point, it does not dive deeper as to the why the behavior exists and why people are in the roles, that they're playing. That obviously goes a lot deeper and it's from their, conditioning in early years. And I was going to reference an expert we have in our book and wrote a book entirely on, the subject of the saver versus the spender. His name is Scott Rick. It's Tightwads and Spendthrifts. And he did an excellent job of really diving into the psychological and personality traits that make up the dynamics around spending when it comes to couples. And when a tightwad marries a tightwad or a spendthrift marries a spendthrift and how that usually plays out. And ironically, when you have a tightwad with a spendthrift, the saver with the spender, it is the more optimal dynamic, right? And you would think like, they're
the more optimal on paper because they balance each other out,
Correct.
But emotionally and
reconciling, absolutely, You got two spenders together. They're like, let's spend. There ain't nothing wrong going on here. Or two people who are saving. They're like, hey, we're comfortable not having fun if it means we get to retire earlier. And then, of course, trying to reconcile the two different behaviors is where a lot of people, the majority of people, fall. So it becomes.
But underneath that, though, you're often seeing people who are modeling either exhibiting behavior that was modeled for them growing up.
100%.
Or they are demonstrating a manifestation of their culture and the way that they learned that it was okay or not okay to spend or save money. And even today, we look to what their risk tolerance. What are they? Is there something they're afraid of? What are they afraid of when it comes to spending money? Where does that come from? So these are some of the questions that we hope to uncover, right? That are beneath the actual spending or saving behavior.
And the thing is, if you're unable to get to a point of communicating openly about those very things that have shaped the behavior of today, you're not going to have a very good shot moving forward in, forging a pathway of teamwork, of fairness, and the ingredients you need to really operate as a financial team so you can focus on the joint goals that you have, that you don't end up in arguments, that your expectations are not met. And we're going to talk about why having a practice and building a practice around this type of communication and the things that you can do on a consistent basis are the things that allow you to move forward in your relationship.
Yeah, I love that you guys brought up the fact that this is really about values. It's the core. What are the belief systems we have? And you brought up cultural differences. Many of the couples I work with, in fact, most are bicultural. And you can see the cultural conditioning, the family conditioning, but really the cultural understanding of money, the way Western versus Eastern, those divides, right? And how that will play out. But we take it so personally versus going, oh, let me better understand my culture.
We have a couple in the book that demonstrate this perfectly from a cultural standpoint. One comes from a big gift giving when the holidays come around, spoil the kids, bring in the holiday spirit. And her husband, not from that background, right? It was not something you did around the holiday time. Sure, you spend time with the people you love, but it wasn't big on gift giving. And something like that, something of how two people grew up around a very special time in most families created a little bit of conflict there. And it needed to be ironed out and resolved. And we got to talk to them about that and actually see them change behaviors after speaking to them, which was really rewarding to see.
And interestingly, when it comes to culture, we're not just talking about the way you spend, but even it comes down to how you are allowed to communicate around money. In some cultures, it is so, faux pas is an understatement. It is just not acceptable to speak about money. And especially there's some cultures where it's not acceptable to speak about money in front of the children. So then they grow up having never once heard a conversation around it, whereas in other cultures, human capital and teaching the ability to go out and earn money and to
the entrepreneurial
is something that is instilled from an early age and modeled for them. And
goes back to what you're saying about people's understanding of risk. And we talked to people who were extraordinarily risk adverse. One woman would repair a roof without it being in a state of repair, or disrepair. Like, hey, let's handle this before it gets there.
We have money right now, so why don't we do this thing to galvanize our safety in the future? But there was nothing wrong with the roof.
And she was married to someone who wanted to break free from the corporate world into entrepreneurship. And you can only imagine what her view and take is of, oh my God, our stability. Like our stability is going to be removed. I don't feel comfortable with this. And they need to reconcile that because nothing was stopping him from doing it. That's what he truly wanted. And he needed to listen to, well, how do I address this concern over here? One that was, not created from a year ago, but created from decades ago and has manifested into their current relationship.
What would you say is the starting point for a couple that's, listening and been together for 10, 15, 20 years going like, okay, we got to start having these conversations better. What would be the starting point?
Heather always says, you know the facts, but you know the stories. And I think that's absolutely critical to understanding and communicating with your partner is to, it's questions like, what was it like growing up in your household? Tell me the stories that are associated with your understanding of money from your past. And once you can start to connect to the way that they felt and the stories that they share with you, you stand a better chance of reconciling whatever disagreement is happening or basically being able to have the perspective that's necessary to change those behaviors.
That's where we want couples to begin, but I will put this caveat out there. It is incredibly hard to change behavior when you've been doing something a certain way for so many years. In our book, we talk about mistakes, and mistakes are in our definition as quote unquote financial experts. It's not my definition of what a mistake is. A mistake can be the two of you have been doing something one way for so long that you don't even realize that one of you has built up incredible resentment around it and no longer thinks that's the right way to be doing something, but you don't have the tools to change it. Mm-hmm. And so I want to acknowledge that up front. This is so hard to start. It's almost harder to start doing after you've been together with someone 10, 15, 20 years and start unwinding some of this stuff. It's almost easier when we can get to a couple at the start of their relationship and say, okay, we're at the getting to know you phase. Let's start asking each other questions. That's different than we've known each other for 20 years, but maybe to say to yourself, like, maybe I don't know everything about the stories that built my partner. Maybe I really do only know the facts. Maybe I only know that my partner's parents got divorced when they were 13, but we never really talked about how that made them feel. We never really talked about the insecurity, the food insecurity that came after that, the housing insecurity, the level of responsibility they had to take on as a young adult. We never really spoke about that. That's a hard, heavy thing to accept that you haven't been doing, I think. And so I just want to acknowledge that up front. And, so when we talk about building a practice around speaking about money, it really is a start slow thing. And there are ways that we suggest.
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
We don't expect you to dive into the hardest, messiest parts of yourself here.
There are ways that we suggest couples build a practice around talking about money that takes it step by step, inch by inch. So, from our standpoint, the best thing to do is set up a quarterly conversation around money. And that quarterly conversation should not be limited to the stuff you would talk about with a financial advisor or a financial expert. That is not limited to your budget.
Yeah, these aren't
net worth table.
The day-to-day conversations and decisions you have around spending.
That will be part of it. That will be part of it. But it's incredibly important that you set aside a piece of those few hours together to talk about some of these qualitative things as well. And that's why we outline so many of these question prompts in our book as you go through the book and say, hey, I'm not saying you should sit down and interview your partner like Oprah Winfrey and think you're going to get to the bottom of all of it in one day. I'm saying that these questions, incorporating a couple of them quarterly in with your quarterly money meeting, will start to uncover a little more about how your partner ticks. What that will do is bless you. What that will do is build empathy, and you'll be able to see a little bit more about where your partner's coming from and put you both in a position to try and maybe start looking for some compromise and some changes that are going to serve you both very well.
And by the way, if you don't say bless you, they edit it out and no one knows I sneeze.
All right. Well, bless you.
So you're describing we got to activate the right side of our brain and the left side of our brain, right? We got to bring the emotional, the storytelling, the feeling as we talk about the stuff on the Excel spreadsheet.
Yes.
100%.
If we don't do that, then really it is like sitting in front of a financial planner and just being like, okay, yep, thank you, move on. But we're talking about a relationship. We're talking about a history, habits, behaviors that are so ingrained that if we don't break out of them and start asking curious questions, they're going to stick around. But we need to start asking curious questions, not only to our partner, but to ourselves. And I love that you guys have prompts in your book because you could ask yourself the same question, like, why do I think this? What was that like?
We try and make it easy as far as conversation starters go by offering these questions at the end of every section, right? We don't want you guessing too much about, how to say it. We also, want to point to the fact that there are some conditions that need to be met for this to be productive, such as time and place mattering. Heather and I both were victims of picking the wrong time and the wrong place to have conversations around money. I would choose family rush hour, which is when the kids come home from school all the way through bedtime. I'd run out of a meeting, be like, guess what happened? Kids are running around throwing food all over the place. That's a terrible time to have some real serious conversations around your finances or almost anything in general. And Heather would return that favor when we'd be exhausted at like 11 p.m. Let me tell you all the things that are making me anxious around this. And it's like, we are gassed. This is also not a good time. So we learned very quickly that finding activities, places, things that you both enjoy doing is a great start to having those productive conversations. For us, it's a walk, a cocktail, a night out for dinner. Yes, we will have these conversations at a restaurant. It's fine. You got to find the things that bring you both together because it makes it a lot harder for someone to look at their busy schedule and say, I'm going to pump this to next week or next quarter or next month. We want that buy-in to be there. So that's one practical condition to have in order to facilitate these conversations.
It's a real event. I mean, this money date is not an hour-long meeting. That's how we're able to incorporate all of this into this meeting because this is a full event. There's a date component, there's a qualitative component, and there's a quantitative component to it. But also by only doing it quarterly, you can set yourself up to one, have something awesome to look forward to. Two, you know that you're not going to cancel it because it's not something that comes up every week, every other week. And three, you allow yourself a chance to see meaningful change from the last quarter.
That's a big one. You do this too frequently, you don't get to observe, the changes in behaviors or, the data points just become too close together. That's a big one there.
And especially, and we haven't talked about this today, but time is a huge component of the work that we talk about and the work we want couples to be doing. Not only how we spend our time, but are we getting to spend our time the way we want to be? How are we valuing each other's time? Are there changes we need to make And we're in a position to do it because we have our finances right in front of us. This is the time to implement those changes. And then you can talk about how that's going in the next quarter. So again, this is such a more holistic conversation around money that I think what couples are used to having, that you realize, wow, so much of this is actually incredibly connected. And we're so much more connected now that we're connecting the dots with all of these things.
It's why money is so much more than just money. I mean, we're talking layer after layer of things from ourselves, our relationships, who we are as people, to the way we spend our time, to the way we honor and acknowledge the power dynamics between us, risk we talked about several times. This is hard stuff. And we're not here to tell you it's easy, but this is why we encourage a practice to be built. I constantly talk about the comparison of like physical health or working out, right? Nobody goes to the gym one time and says, I'm in the best shape of my life. Everybody knows you need to put in the reps. The thing about the gym is you can go 3-4 times a week, right? It's more accessible than maybe these quarterly meetings. So building a practice is arguably harder due to the time in which you need and the distance between those meeting points. But when you do it, over the course of, and we're not talking 1 year, 2 years, you need to put in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years to build this practice. You need to be committed to it. The payoff's huge. For taking that commitment and meeting consistently quarter in and quarter out over a handful of years, you receive some of the biggest rewards imaginable, not just to how organized your financial life becomes, but how connected to your partner you become and how much more fair your relationship becomes. Your kids are happier. You're happier. These are all the byproducts that any person would want. And you just don't get them by having one successful meeting. You need 8 to 20 of them, and you are on your way.
And also, I think it's worth pointing out that none of us really know what's going to happen tomorrow. We all have things that happen to our lives, things we weren't planning. And I think that it's incredibly important to do this work because it prepares you for the stuff that you don't know is going to happen.
Right.
When plans need to change, you are putting yourself in a position because you are nimble, you are working together, you're not operating in silos. Your values, to your point, Katie, at the beginning, are clear. And having that clarity in those moments where the actual life environment or the events taking place around you aren't as clear or they've changed, having clarity between the two of you is a superpower.
I wouldn't be a financial professional without inserting, we see the idea that we see this all the time with people and their feelings and emotions around investing. The same thing happens here. When you are organized and in control of your financial life, you get to be proactive when things get quote unquote wild, right? When normally most people's emotions are running high, they make a financial mistake. They sell something at a low. They don't buy that low instead. So when you are proactive, when you have things managed and under control, you can be like, hey, normally this would be very scary, but I see opportunity. And then you take advantage of that opportunity and you benefit from it.
Not just opportunity, but you see ways to care for and help and support one another through it.
Correct. On the financial side, opportunity. On the real life relationship side, the opportunity is a chance to prevent damage from happening, to be able to catch something or catch your partner before their feelings level. Hey, I know you feel a certain way when this happens because of what you've experienced or your culture or whatever it may be. And now I can say, hey, here, that is where the value is, to be able to check and catch one another in the process of, this is typically where your emotions, or I understand you and I can now help instead of react. And guess what's going to happen when you start reacting? That's where the fights begin. That's where people's emotions start to overflow into other parts of their life. And that's not great.
What I really enjoy about this quarterly conversation, this money date, is you removing two things. You're removing the my money, your money, and we don't really have a plan together. And also for many millennial women, the realization that their parents, their mothers and their grandmothers didn't do anything with the money, left it up to the men in their lives. And then when the men in their lives died first, they didn't know what to do. Removing those two levels and going, no, everyone's going to be educated. Everyone's going to be on the same page. And we're going to be talking actively about this once a quarter for the next 4, 5, 6. I mean, let's be honest, it needs to be just lifetime together, having these discussions so that nobody is left going, I don't know.
That is
what gets paid. I'm not sure where or what or how.
That is such a critical piece. And there's such a critical piece of why I personally did this and worked on this book. And, we give a little bit of tough love, and it's not just meant for women. It's meant for any disengaged partner who's stepped away from the finances, but in practicality, that is often women. And we wanted them to see that despite however we choose to delegate the responsibilities and the day-to-day tasks in our life, I'm not saying you need to be responsible for paying all the bills. You need to be responsible for managing the investments on a day-to-day. But there is a certain amount of foundational knowledge that everyone is responsible for as individual people. And so much of this work is yours, mine, and ours. You are not absolved of that because you have found a partner and you have merged into this homogenous blob that will just take care of you for all of eternity. That is not serving you well. It's not serving your partner well either, because they may be looking for a partner and a teammate in this work. They may not have the words to say that to you. And if they're not looking for a partner and teammate in that work, and that they are kind of moving about this unchecked, that's a whole separate can of worms to open up about why is one person allowed to make all the financial decisions in this household when your needs need to be met as well? Because if they're not, then down the road, at some point, you will wake up and you will say, where have I been?
This is only anecdotal and not science whatsoever here. But while we were writing this book, I asked a few of my friends who I know the men were typically, handling the finances. And I would just ask them like, hey, would you like it if your wife, if your spouse, was, and most of them said, I would love another set of eyes on this. So to Heather's point, again, here we're right back at communication. They did not know, I've tried to do this and kind of gave up. Or, you know what, I'm just going to deal with it because we got into an argument last time we did it, things like that. Again, our motivation was to figure out ways to prevent that kind of stuff from happening or give the tools in which to engage.
We had interviewed a couple for the book when they found out that she was having twins in the middle of the night. And it was their first children. The husband just went like completely off the deep end. He was like flipping out. He's like, how are we going to afford this? He was like crunching numbers.
Right to the spreadsheets. Yeah.
Into bed. And my first thought, just as a woman, as a mother, as thinking of putting myself back in those shoes of like finding out that I'm pregnant for the first time and about to become a mother, like I was like, what a jerk. That was my first thought. Couples expert who we interviewed in that section had posed a different viewpoint. She said, maybe his reaction wasn't the best, but have you thought about the fact that he handled the entirety of their personal finances? She had been totally tapped out. Maybe in that moment, he felt an overwhelming weight of responsibility and thought, this is all on me. It was important that we show both sides of that, right? There are two sides of this, and that there are many, many reasons and benefits to why both parties should be involved, why both partners need to have a role in the finances. It's not just for the what happens if something happens to your partner, or what happens if you're not in control enough. It's about support. It's about support too.
Definitely. I want to throw a wild card question in, throw you off a little bit.
Yeah.
So working with FIRE couples who, once they hit their goal, one is like, we're living the life. This is the, what we've painted the picture for. And the other one's like, I can't make the jump. Let's give a little support to those listeners who are like, we finally hit our number that we said we wanted to hit. And once we hit that number, we're going to live this way. And they can't make that choice. They can't do it.
Yeah, I forget who said it. It was a long, long time ago in my career. Someone posed this thing, one of the hardest things about retirement is not knowing what you're retiring to. Everybody knows what they're retiring from. And I see this all the time for our clients who are retirees, and that stuck with me for so long. And genuinely, one of my biggest concerns is, what are you going to be filling your time with? What fills your cup, right? And it's not about if it's making money and continue working, no one said you had to stop. You just, financial independence is a better term for retirement. No one said you had to stop. You just can afford to if you want to. So it's that right there. So again, here we are, eighth time, back to communication. People I generally find in the FIRE movement, focusing so much on the numbers, focusing so much on getting to that goal, and perhaps not thinking about, how are we going to fill our cup and fill our time? What are we going to be going to? And when that is present, problems exist. You see the dynamics quite frequently of one person being like, I don't need that. Like, I did the work. I'm here. I'm going to figure it out as we go. But most people don't operate like that. You see a lot of folks who do, whether it's fat fire, whatever fire they're going for, they go right back to work. Like 3 years later, they're like, couldn't figure that part out. I'm going to go do, another startup here and try and do the same thing I did again and, hit the unicorn.
We asked all the couples we interviewed what was enough, whether they felt like they had enough. They said, what do you mean, enough money? I said, no, it's however you define enough. And I think that especially with a fire couple, they may have defined a number that they thought was enough. But if they're in conflict when they reach that number, they haven't actually answered that question. They could be drinking from different sized glasses the whole time. And it was not about money. It was about fulfillment. They haven't taken the time to really understand whether they're aligned on that.
Same reason people go to the budget and the numbers instead of going to the stories and the feelings and the reasons for the behaviors. Fire is awesome for folks who do this and get there. I'm jealous. But when you don't do what Heather is suggesting here, when you don't share the reasons for why it is you're doing it or what you're going to, it can be all for naught. It's very easy just to focus on it. It's just easy to focus on that than the other side of it.
What is enough? What a beautiful question. What is enough? What is fulfilling? Because you're exactly right. If you are going to do this whole financial independence, retire early, what are you retiring to? And why? What's the why?
You just see the goalposts get moved. Like, we're 1 year away from fire. I don't have those answers. It's fat fire now. We need to, it needs to be $150,000 a year, not $100,000 a year. We got it wrong.
Claim that it's easy. Like Doug and I go back often. There was a time right when we had our first daughter when I remember specifically saying to Doug, how much money would we need to make per year for you to feel okay? We have far past that number, but now it no longer feels okay. Do you know what I mean? Like, the number has moved. The goalpost has moved. And you have to catch yourself sometime and say to yourself, I think that number should be untethered from this idea of enough. For us, it now is, right? Because you can both say there are financial goals that we have that would make our lives, we would love to have them, but we don't need them.
Yeah.
And I think that finding that peace and contentment is what makes this fun, what makes it more fun, life more fun.
Are you having fun?
Yeah.
We're having fun.
Yeah.
Good. Genuinely. Nobody's watching, but you get to hear them. They are. They're happy.
We're having fun.
They're
good time.
It. To wrap us up, I would love to hear if people want to connect with you, if they want to find the book, it'll be in the show notes. But if they're like, oh, I just want to search right now, talk to us a little bit about how they connect with you and get the book.
Sure. Whole website for it. domoneytogether.com. You can learn all about the book, all the links you need, everything you want to know about the book is there.
We also write a weekly newsletter if you're into reading more about love, money, family, work, all sorts of the stuff in between. Our weekly newsletter is called The Joint Account, and you can find it on Substack at readthejointaccount.com.
Good times over there.
I love that.
I'm going to take the credit on that. Heather usually comes up with all the good titles and stuff, but I managed to squeak one out there. And for any information related to the firm and the work we do professionally, the firm's Bonafide Wealth, and you can go to bonafidewealth.com and you can follow Heather and I on social, same handle across all platforms. I'm at Doug Boneparth and she is at
Average Joelle.
There we go.
Excellent. I've got it. I'll have all of those links in the show notes so that those who are listening can go and grab it. I have a feeling that people will hit the replay on this episode to make sure they gathered all of those good points you gave. I love when people have practical tools for my listeners so that you can stop listening and go, okay, hold on, we need to go buy the book and then we can ask these questions and we need to start quarterly having these meetings and talk about our stories around money, our values, our cultural differences. It's essential.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much for your time and your wisdom. And dear listeners, we'll see you next week. Before you go, I want to leave you with this. The effort you put into your relationship is one of the most important investments you'll ever make. How you communicate and grow together shapes your home, your leadership, and the example you set for the people around you. Relationship work is truly legacy work, and it quietly impacts more lives than we often realize. If this episode resonated, consider sharing it with someone you care about, a partner, a friend, or another couple who's building a full life and want their relationship to be the best part of it too. And if you're enjoying these conversations, make sure to follow or subscribe to Relationship Reset. Leaving a rating or review also helps this message reach more couples who are ready to grow with intention. I'll see you next week.